He told the neighbors I'd started wandering at night, but I was sitting at my kitchen table when he said it, clear-eyed, steady-handed, and very much awake. That was the moment the air in my chest turned cold, the moment I understood. My own son had begun rewriting me while I was still here to hear it. I am 78. I still thread needles without glasses. I still remember the birthdays of every child I ever taught to read. I still balance my checkbook to the cent. Yet that morning, when Mrs. Halpern from across the street leaned over her fence and asked, "How are you feeling today, dear? Better rested?" I felt something inside me tilt. Better rested from what? She hesitated, cheeks tightening. "Oh, well, Paul mentioned you'd had a rough night." Poor thing. I didn't correct her. At my age, silence is sometimes sharper than a retort. Inside the house, the light was pale and wintry, sliding across the wooden floorboards I'd polished myself for 40 years. Nothing seemed out of place at first, until I noticed the drawer of my desk half open. I hadn't touched it in days. My keys, too, weren't where I always left them. The ring had been turned, as if someone tried them quietly during the night. Maybe another woman my age would doubt herself. I don't have that luxury. Doubt is how you lose your name long before you lose your mind. I walked through the hallway slowly, listening. The house holds sound differently when someone's been inside. You learn that after a lifetime of widowhood. Footsteps soften, air shifts, doors remember being opened. I pressed my palm against the banister. It felt faintly warm. Paul had a habit of letting himself in to check on me. He said the key made things easier. I had agreed at the time, thinking it was kindness. But kindness doesn't move your papers or turn off your space heater when you know you left it on, or place yesterday's letter under today's pile as though to suggest you misplaced it. The phone rang. One short, clipped ring. His ring. "Mom," he said, breathless in that way he uses when he's preparing an explanation rather than greeting. "I talked to Dr. Shane yesterday. We should schedule you for a little evaluation. Nothing dramatic. Just to make sure everything's okay." I stayed quiet long enough for him to fill the silence with his own worry. "You've been forgetful," he added. Forgetful. A word said softly, but it lands with the weight of a verdict. I asked him what exactly I had forgotten. He listed things I hadn't done, hadn't said, hadn't lived. Events rearranged, conversations trimmed and reshaped, as though my life were a badly organized drawer he intended to tidy for me. When he hung up, I stood in the middle of my living room, listening to the old clock tick, the same one his father used to wind every Sunday night. I thought of how gently I had raised that boy, how many nights I'd stayed up sewing costumes for school plays he barely remembered. Now, he was drawing the outline of a woman who misplaced her mind like an umbrella. But the trouble with drawing someone smaller is that sometimes they notice the shrinking. I sat back down at the kitchen table, where the morning had begun to cool. The window was cracked open, a thin line of air brushing my cheek. Across the street, Mrs. Halpern watched my house the way people watch a storm they've been warned about. I folded my hands, steady, dry, unshaking. No, my mind was not slipping, but something else was, and I intended to find it before he redrew me completely. The next morning began with another small humiliation wrapped in politeness, the kind people think you won't notice because of your age. I was clipping dead leaves from my geranium when a young grocery clerk I barely knew shouted from the sidewalk, "Be careful out here today, Mrs. Harden. Your son said you had a dizzy spell last week." A dizzy spell. I haven't been dizzy a single day in 20 years. Even grief never managed to knock me off my feet. I thanked the boy gently. None of this was his fault. But inside, something tugged low in my chest. That's how reputations erode, not with accusations, but with concerned voices, with soft rumors wearing slippers. I went back inside and found another misplaced object. My reading glasses on the shelf above the stove, where I would never put them. I keep my habits tight, like knots sailors can trust. And yet, there they were, balanced in the place where Paul once said, "You really shouldn't reach so high anymore, Mom." I sat for a long moment, letting the quiet stretch across the house the way winter sunlight does. Long, thin, and revealing every bit of dust. My memory was fine. My balance was fine. Something else was shifting beneath me, like a floorboard that had begun to warp. By noon, the doorbell rang. It was Erin, my daughter-in-law, carrying a bag of groceries she hadn't been invited to buy. "Thought I'd save you a trip," she said brightly, stepping inside without waiting. Her perfume filled the hallway before her intentions did. "How are you holding up? Paul says you've been overwhelmed." Overwhelmed. Another word chosen like a decorative pillow. Soft, pretty, and meant to suggest I could no longer sit upright on my own. She set the bag down and began inspecting my pantry as if she were taking inventory for a facility brochure. "You know," she said lightly, "it might be better not to live alone in such a big house. It's a lot for you. No shame in that. Maybe something smaller, safer." Safer for whom? I wanted to ask. Instead, I let her talk, watching her eyes more than her mouth. She never looked at me directly for long. Guilt has a way of blinking before a person does. She pulled out my tea jars next. "Chamomile expired? Peppermint too strong at your age? Oh, and this one." I took the jar from her hand. "I've made tea longer than you've been alive, dear." Her smile faltered, then tightened again like a belt on the wrong notch. "Of course. I just worry. You forget things. We all do." "No," I said quietly. "Some of us remember very precisely." For a moment, the room was still. Erin reached into her purse and placed a folded paper on the table. "Paul wanted you to look at this. Just something simple. A form that helps us keep an eye on your medical decisions. Only in emergencies." I didn't open it. Paper rustles differently when it carries betrayal. "The weight is wrong." She hovered, waiting for a signature I did not give. When she finally left, I exhaled slowly, the way a woman exhales when she's finished lifting something heavy that no one else can see. I carried the folded document to my desk, slid it beside yesterday's misplaced keys, and began a notebook. A simple ledger of truth. Dates. Times. Words said. Names of who said them. People underestimate how sharp older women can be. They think if the body softens, the mind must collapse like dough in summer heat. But I have lived through deaths, recessions, blackouts, and the long winter after my husband died. I survived all of it because I paid attention, and now, it seemed, I would have to survive my own child. That evening, as I sat by the window watching the neighborhood settle into its usual rhythm, children playing, porch lights blinking on, dogs being let out for their last walk, I heard two women pausing near my yard. "Poor thing," one whispered. "She used to be so sharp. Paul told me she mixed up her pills twice last month." I felt my jaw tighten. I don't take pills, not a single one. Rumors travel faster than truth, especially when carried by people who enjoy the sweetness of concern more than the duty of accuracy. I closed the curtains softly. The house dimmed to a warm gold around me, a color I chose years ago because it reminded me of safety, before safety had to be defended. I made myself a cup of tea, steady-handed, steady-hearted, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. Page 1 was nearly full. Page 2 waited patiently. I wasn't afraid, but I was no longer naive. The next day brought a sharp, metallic quiet, the kind that settles in a house when someone has touched what they shouldn't. I woke early, earlier than my bones usually agreed to, because something in the air felt disturbed. I went to my desk, opened the top drawer, and found a folder I hadn't left open. Inside were my tax records, bank statements, and the deed to my home. They were stacked wrong. My hands know their own order. I've had decades of habit. But 2 pages had been switched, one missing entirely. A missing page is not forgetfulness. It is intrusion. I stood there a long moment, the way one stands after hearing a distant door slam. Unsure where the sound came from, but certain it meant something. I reached for the phone and dialed Paul. He didn't say hello. "Mom, about that form Aaron gave you," he began, voice clipped. "I need you to look it over. It simplifies things, makes transitions easier." "Transitions to what?" I asked. He hesitated, and that silence told me more than his explanation ever could. "Just planning ahead. You don't want to worry about paperwork if something happens." I thought of the missing document in my drawer. "Something like what?" He sighed, impatient. "Let's not do this. You know your memory hasn't been the same." There it was again. That story he was telling the world about me. A story he needed to be true before anyone could question why he was rewriting my life on paper. "I'll review it," I said. My voice stayed level, though I felt heat rising beneath my ribs. I hung up before he could say more. I carried the folder to the kitchen table, where the morning light was strongest. That light has revealed many truths over the years. Scratches on chairs, dust in corners, cracks in people. I spread the papers out. Page 4 of my insurance file was indeed missing. Page 4, which listed my emergency directives and the secondary contact. A friend from my teaching days, someone Paul always disliked because she had a mind sharper than his. I took a breath and opened the document Aaron had delivered. Not a simple medical permission, as she claimed. It was a durable power of attorney, already filled out, with my name typed in blank spaces I never authorized. All it lacked was my signature. I laid my palm flat over it, feeling something shift inside me. Not fear. No, I've lived too long and buried too many people to fear paper. What I felt was older, steadier. The awareness that someone you loved as a child has begun to love you only as a resource. I folded the document slowly, carefully, and placed it in my notebook. Evidence. Not accusation yet. Just evidence. By noon, the door knocked softly. A man in a charcoal suit stood there, holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Harden, I'm here on behalf of Larkin Wood Medical. Your son arranged a cognitive assessment." "My son didn't consult me," I replied. He gave a practiced smile. "It's routine at your age." "I didn't ask for routine." He shifted, uncomfortable. "It would help your family make decisions." I felt something cold slide through me, but my voice stayed calm. "Young man, I built a whole career teaching children how to distinguish facts from assumptions. I won't start confusing the two now." He left with a polite nod, but I watched him pause halfway down the walkway, to text someone. I saw my son's name on the screen before he tilted it away. There is a particular ache in realizing you are being managed like inventory. After he left, I locked the door, not out of fear, but out of principle. Then I made my afternoon tea, steady as always. The kettle whistled the same way it had for decades. My hands moved with the same precision. If this was what decline looked like, then the world had changed its definitions without telling me. Later, as the sun fell low, I reviewed the folder again. There was handwriting on the inside edge of one page. Small, hurried, and not mine. A note, likely meant to remind someone, "Get signature soon." It was almost laughable how careless they'd become. People think age dulls observation. In truth, it sharpens it, because you have less to prove and more to protect. I closed the folder, smoothed its edges, and placed it back where it belonged. But I did not close my notebook. Some stories, once started, need to be written in full. 2 days later, the medical visit arrived without warning. The sort of visit arranged by someone who assumes you won't question why a stranger is suddenly interested in your mind. It was noon when the doorbell rang. I expected the mailman. Instead, a woman stood there with a clipboard, a polite smile, and a badge that meant very little to me. "Mrs. Harden? I'm Dr. Lillian Shore. Your son scheduled a preliminary cognitive screening. Just routine." That word again. Routine. A word people use when they hope you'll surrender without thinking. "I didn't schedule anything," I said. "Of course," she replied, stepping one foot inside as if the house would accept her before I did. "Your son expressed concern about—" She glanced down at her notes. "Memory fluctuations." My memory was fine. It was hers, and Paul's, that seemed unreliable. "I'm not comfortable with unannounced assessments," I said. She softened her voice, the way professionals do when they decide your resistance is part of your diagnosis. "It would help your family. They're worried." Worried? Yet not one of them had asked me how I felt about any of this. Concern without conversation is not concern at all. I invited her to sit anyway, not out of agreement, but out of curiosity. Her eyes wandered around the house, the framed photos, the shelves of books, the neat rows of labeled drawers. Her gaze lingered too long, as though she was assessing more than my cognition. She began with questions I'd heard my own mother answer decades ago in a hospital, long before her mind dimmed. "What day is it? Who is the president? Do you remember what you had for breakfast?" Her tone was gentle, but the assumption behind it was not. I answered each question clearly, without hurry, without trembling. The more I spoke, the more her pen slowed. Her expression shifted from expectation to something quieter. Doubt, perhaps. Then she asked almost casually, "Has anyone told you that you've been forgetting things? Misplacing items?" I held her gaze. "Someone telling a story does not make it true." She blinked. That answer wasn't in her script. I gestured toward the kitchen. "Would you like to see how I organize my medications?" She nodded, and I opened a small drawer containing exactly 2 bottles. Vitamin D and a mild pain reliever I rarely touched. Both were clearly labeled, dates forward, lids clean. "Your son mentioned concerns." "Yes," I said. "He's mentioned many things lately." I didn't elaborate. Let her sit with that. After a few more questions, she closed her clipboard and stood. "Mrs. Harden, I don't see signs of cognitive decline. You're oriented, articulate, and attentive. I'll note that." Her voice carried a hint of something else. Something like apology. But apologies without responsibility are as light as feathers. They flutter and fall without landing anywhere meaningful. As I walked her to the door, she lowered her voice. If anything changes, if you feel pressured or uncomfortable, you can request a neutral evaluation. You don't need family permission for that. So she had sensed it. Not the details, but the shape of something wrong. I'll remember, I said, and I will. Remembering has never been my weakness. When she left, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching her car pull away. The assessment hadn't been for my benefit. It had been designed to confirm a conclusion someone else had already drawn. But it had failed, and I took that as a quiet victory. Still, victory did not change what I found that evening. In the hallway cabinet, a cabinet no one but Paul ever touched, I found my insurance file again. This time, page 4 was not missing. It was replaced. A new page, freshly printed. My signature had been scanned and placed at the bottom. Only it wasn't mine. Or rather, it was mine, but lifted from another document entirely. My hand is steady, but it does not repeat itself. No signature ever does. I sat down at the dining table and looked at the forgery for a long time. The lines were almost perfect. Almost. But age teaches you to see small differences. The angle of a loop, the pressure on a downstroke, the way ink settles. Someone thought I wouldn't notice. Someone believed the version of me they'd been describing aloud. Confused, soft, fading. But I am none of those things. I placed the forged page carefully into my notebook. The house felt different now, not unsafe, but watched, as though I were living inside someone else's plan. I closed the curtains, not out of fear, but out of clarity. People had begun drawing a version of me that did not exist. And if they insisted on drawing, I would have to show them just how wrong their picture was. The house had always been a place that held its breath softly, the way old homes do when they've watched a family grow and drift. But over the next few days, the silence changed. It felt interfered with, as if the air remembered hands that were not mine. It began with small disappearances. My pearl earrings, the ones my husband gave me the year before he died, gone from the dish where they lived for 30 years. I searched the obvious places, then the drawers I rarely opened. Nothing. Next, a grocery receipt I had kept to compare prices. Missing. Not valuable, not sentimental, but mine, and misplaced only by someone who wanted the illusion of forgetfulness to appear natural. Then, on Saturday morning, I found my electric bill tucked behind a stack of old magazines in the hallway cabinet. The bill had been opened and folded again. Not my folding. I creased paper differently, inward first, always. For a moment I stood there, the bill in my hand, feeling something old and steady rise inside me. The same steadying force I had felt the night I drove myself to the hospital when my husband collapsed. The same force I felt when I walked into my first classroom at 22. Not courage exactly, but clarity. Someone was constructing a version of my life without my consent. In the afternoon, Erin appeared again. She knocked softly, as if politeness could hide her purpose. This time she carried a small plastic organizer. "I thought this might help," she said, stepping inside before I could accept or decline. "A pill sorter. Monday through Sunday. They're a lifesaver at your age." I looked at the empty compartments. "I don't take pills." She laughed lightly. "That's the point. You forget to." "I forget nothing," I said. Her smile froze just enough for truth to slip between us. She set the sorter on my kitchen table, right on top of yesterday's newspaper, as though claiming territory. "You know," she continued, opening my refrigerator, "you've rearranged things oddly. Milk on the top shelf? You never did that before." I didn't rearrange anything. "Well," she said, closing the door with a gentle thud, "memory habits shift." She paused, watching me with that expression she wore when deciding whether to speak plainly or pretend to be kind. "It's nothing to be ashamed of, Margaret. I told Paul we'd help you through it." "Help me through what?" "The story they kept telling each other until it became real enough in their minds to justify every intrusion. When she left, the house felt smaller, as if her perfume clung to the walls. I opened the windows to let the cold air in. Winter air tells the truth. It doesn't hide human intentions. Later that evening, while sorting laundry in my bedroom, I noticed a faint scratch on the lock of my wardrobe. Not deep enough to break the wood, but new. I touched it lightly. A thin, sharp line, made by impatience or by someone who didn't want to be caught, opening what didn't belong to them. My hands did not shake. Fear is an indulgence I've learned to put aside. I retrieved my notebook and wrote everything down. Earrings missing, bill moved, wardrobe scratched, pillbox delivered. Dates, times, descriptions. If they wanted to say I was losing track of things, I would keep track of them with the precision of an archivist. Before bed, I checked the front door. The deadbolt was turned halfway. Not fully locked, not fully open. I always locked it fully. Always. I slid it into place and pressed my forehead lightly against the cold wood. It wasn't the intrusion that unsettled me most. It was the carelessness. The assumption that I wouldn't notice. That age had softened not only my memory, but my awareness, my dignity, my vigilance. But the truth is simpler. The older you get, the more you pay attention. Because the world begins trying to erase you long before your mind agrees to fade. I sat at the kitchen table again, hands wrapped around a warm mug, notebook open beside me. Through the window, the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one. Small beacons of normalcy in a day that had been anything but. In the quiet, the house settled the way it always had. But I no longer trusted the silence entirely. It had become a witness to something being arranged around me. I wrote one more line before closing the notebook for the night. Someone is preparing a story about me, but I am preparing a record. And then I turned off the light. The dinner invitation came from Paul the way unpleasant news often arrives. Too cheerful, too sudden, wrapped in a tone meant to soften something sharp. "Just a simple family meal, Mom," he said on the phone. "We want to talk about a few things, that's all." Talk. People rarely announce good conversations. By late afternoon, I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing the sleeves of a sweater I'd worn for years. At my age, vanity shifts into something quieter. Not the desire to impress, but the insistence on appearing as you truly are. I would not show up looking frail. I tied my hair back, put on my coat, and walked to his house with steps steady enough to silence any rumors. Inside, the warmth was forced, like the heat turned too high. Erin greeted me first. Her smile was polite in the way of someone welcoming a witness, not a guest. Paul hovered near the kitchen doorway, shoulders stiff. "We're glad you're here," he said, though his eyes didn't agree. Dinner was already set. My place at the table looked altered. No napkin, no water glass. Everyone else had a full setting. Mine was bare, as if they'd forgotten, or as if they wanted the appearance of forgetfulness to cling to me the moment I sat down. I took my seat quietly. I have learned that sometimes silence can stop a room more effectively than accusation. Conversation began with small talk, but it wasn't small. It was structured, carefully guided toward the topic they meant to reach. "You've seemed overwhelmed lately," Erin said, cutting into her food without looking at me. "And tired," Paul added. "We've noticed you're slipping a bit." "It happens, Mom. We're just trying to help." There it was, the script they had rehearsed. I lifted my eyes to them one by one. "Tell me exactly what you've noticed." They exchanged glances. Erin spoke first. "You lose track of things. Bills, earrings, keys. And you forget conversations," Paul said. "Important ones." That last line was said slowly, as if meant to build a foundation for something official later. I reached for my purse, calm, unhurried. Inside was my small recording device, an old one I'd kept from my teaching days. I pressed the button without removing it. They didn't notice. "Give me examples," I said. They couldn't. Not real ones, only suggestions wrapped in vague concern. Then came the sentence that told me exactly why this dinner had been arranged. "We think it's time," Paul said, "to plan for the future. Safer living arrangements, someone to manage your paperwork, maybe even a guardianship," Erin finished, her voice soft, in the way people soften cruelty. Guardianship. A word meant for children or the incapacitated, not for a woman who still remembered the names of every student she'd ever taught. I looked at my empty place setting again, a detail small enough to dismiss, but deliberate enough to insult. They wanted the others at the table, cousins, an aunt, to see me diminished before the conversation even began. "How long," I asked, "have you been discussing this without me?" Paul swallowed, a small gesture, but telling. "We just want what's best," he said. For whom, he did not specify. I set my hands on the table, steady as stone. "I see." Dinner went on, though no one tasted much. They continued talking around me, shaping a narrative as if it were already agreed upon. But I simply listened, storing every word, every hesitation, every misstep. When dessert came, I didn't touch it. Instead, I asked one more question. "Do either of you believe I cannot make my own decisions?" Silence. A long, thick silence. "You need support," Paul said finally. "Support requires trust." They had shown me neither. I rose slowly from my chair, not dramatically, simply with the dignity I refused to surrender. My coat slid over my shoulders easily. "Thank you for dinner," I said. No one stopped me. Outside, the night air was cold enough to feel honest. I walked home beneath the streetlights, each step deliberate. In my purse, the recorded conversation rested like quiet armor. They thought I hadn't seen the trap they were building, but I had seen every piece. The morning after that dinner felt heavier than the night itself. Not with fear, I've lived too long for that, but with the weight of understanding. Once someone has spoken their intentions aloud, even gently, there is no going back to pretending. I made my tea slowly, listening to the kettle as if it were answering questions I hadn't asked yet. The house was still, but not peacefully. Still, the way a room becomes after someone has moved something when you weren't looking. I found the proof before noon. The mail had been slid through the slot. 3 envelopes, one addressed directly to Paul, at my address, a bank logo on the corner. I held it in my hand for a long moment. The envelope was sealed, but the implication wasn't. Someone was already rerouting my life. I didn't open it. I simply placed it on the table and studied the handwriting on the address line. It wasn't mine. It wasn't the bank's. It was Erin's. Her looped R's gave her away. Whatever was inside wasn't meant to be seen by me. I added it to my notebook. Paul receiving financial mail at my address. Notified at 10:14 a.m. As I wrote, I felt a quiet steadiness forming inside me, the same steadiness women my age learn to rely on. People think resilience grows loud with age. It doesn't. It grows silent, deliberate. By afternoon, Paul called. "Mom, did anything come for me? I had something forwarded." "Why is your mail coming here?" I asked. He paused, long enough to choose a lie. "It's easier for me. And Erin thought you might need help sorting things." Help. Their favorite word. A word that felt more like a hand closing around mine, guiding it toward a signature. I didn't argue. Argument gives people proof they're right. Instead, I let the silence sit between us until he cleared his throat and changed the subject. When the call ended, I opened the hallway closet to retrieve a winter coat and saw that my file box, the one containing my most important documents, had been shifted. A centimeter, perhaps, but enough. The lid didn't sit flush the way I always left it. I lifted it. The weight was wrong. Something had been removed. Inside, my marriage certificate was out of order. A savings bond envelope had been opened and tucked back improperly. Items from different folders had been rearranged as if someone had searched quickly, maybe even confidently, believing I wouldn't notice. But women my age always notice when the foundations of their life are touched. I spent the next hour returning everything to its rightful place, not because I needed order for myself, but because I wanted the next disturbance to be unmistakable. If they were building a case, then so was I. Around 4, Erin appeared again. No warning, no excuse. "We were worried," she said. "You didn't answer Paul's text." "I was busy," I replied. "Doing what?" "Living in my home." The answer unsettled her. She smiled thinly and walked through the house as though inspecting a rental property she hoped to purchase. Her eyes lingered on my bills, on the folder beside my notebook, on the single envelope addressed to her husband. "You seem tense," she said. "Tension," I replied, "usually comes from being cornered." She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she looked unsure. I watched her carefully. People reveal their intentions not just through words, but through what they can't explain. When she left, I stood in the doorway watching her hurry down the steps. She didn't glance back. People acting in honesty look back. People acting in secrecy do not. I locked the door and sat in my chair by the window. The late afternoon light reached across the living room floor, the same as it had for 4 decades. But I felt the house preparing itself, as if it knew I might need its walls as witnesses. I opened my notebook again and wrote slowly, clearly. They are accelerating. Someone went through the file box. Mail redirected. Intent now overt, not implied. The pen didn't tremble. For the first time in days, neither did I. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because of fear. Fear fades with age, the way sharp pains soften into aches. But because the house creaked differently, as though it had begun to expect things of me, or perhaps warn me. By morning, I had made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Just the kind of decision a woman makes when she's been pushed toward a wall and remembers she still has strength in her back. I called Tom Bennett, a former student of mine who had gone on to become an attorney. I hadn't seen him in years, but I remembered how carefully he listened as a boy, always leaning forward in class as if truth were something one could catch with both hands. He remembered me immediately. Mrs. Harden, are you all right? A simple question, but asked with the suspicion that I might not be, a suspicion planted by someone else. I'd like to see you, I said. Today, if possible. His tone warmed. Of course. Come by at 2, and take your time getting here. At 2 o'clock sharp, I entered his office, a modest space with shelves of casebooks and a window that overlooked the post office where I'd once taught him how to find stamps for his grandmother. He rose when he saw me. You look well, he said. I am well, I answered, despite what others may be saying. His brow tightened gently. What's happening? I placed my notebook on his desk. Not all of it. Just enough pages to show a pattern without revealing the ache behind it. He read silently, his jaw tightening as he went. They're documenting you, he said finally. Or rather, creating a version of you that fits their plan. I thought so, I said, but I wanted confirmation. He asked me to tell the story from the beginning. I did. Slowly, clearly, without embellishment. The forged page, the rearranged documents, the dinner conversation, the medical visit, the redirected mail, the sudden urgency in their voices. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Harden, everything you've described fits a pattern of attempted guardianship without grounds. If successful, they'd control your assets, decisions, even your movements. I know, I said quietly. That's why I'm here. You're mentally sharp, he continued. Very sharp. They don't have a legal basis, but they might create one if you're not careful. I looked at the window. Outside, a woman was lifting a child into a car seat. Small, everyday tenderness. I felt a pang thinking of Paul as a boy, climbing into our old sedan with sticky hands and a laugh that didn't know how to hurt. There's something else, I said. I found a document with my signature copied onto it. Tom straightened. Do you have it? I handed him the page. He held it up to the light, tracing the edges with his thumb. This is a digital lift. Clean, but not clean enough. It's fraud, Margaret. He rarely used first names. I let the moment settle between us. What do I do? I asked. You need protection, he said. Not from them physically, but from the power they're trying to take. The first step is securing your estate so they cannot touch it. A trust. A revocable living trust that names you as the sole controller while you're alive. And after? That's your choice, he said. But they cannot access it during your lifetime, not even with a guardianship petition. I nodded slowly. I want that. He began gathering forms, speaking in steady, deliberate tones. We'll draft it today, then we'll document everything, every irregularity, every intrusion. If they attempt anything formal, we'll have a record ready. I felt a long breath leave me. Not relief exactly. Something quieter. Something like standing on firmer ground after weeks of shifting sand. Margaret, he added, softening, you're not losing your mind. You're being targeted, and you're responding with more clarity than most people half your age. I managed a faint smile. Not gratitude, recognition. Before I left, he handed me a sealed envelope. This is a certified statement confirming your mental competency as of today. It's signed and notarized. Keep it somewhere safe. I placed it carefully in my bag. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. My steps felt measured, but not heavy. There is a difference between being watched and being prepared. As I reached the corner, I paused, letting the cold air settle over my hands. I wasn't done, not even close. The next morning, I woke with an unfamiliar sensation. Not dread, Not exactly courage, but a kind of quiet readiness, as though something in me had finally decided to stop absorbing and start redirecting. The trust documents sat on my kitchen table, neatly arranged where the morning light touched them first. I read each page again, slowly, not because I doubted my understanding, I've always read with care, but because this wasn't just paperwork. It was a boundary, one I'd needed long before I knew it. By 10 o'clock, I was at the bank. The manager, a polite young man with careful hair, guided me to a small office. He assumed I needed help. Older women often get their competence discounted before they even open their mouths. I let him run through his rehearsed explanations until he realized I followed every sentence. "These accounts," he said, adjusting his glasses, "will now be titled Under the Trust. You remain the sole trustee. No one else can withdraw, alter, or close them." "No one," I repeated. He nodded. "Correct." I signed the documents with a steady hand. My signature looked just as it always had, curved, deliberate, unmistakably mine. Not the imitation Paul had slipped into my files. Once everything was sealed and notarized, the manager stood and shook my hand. "If anyone tries to make changes without your authorization, the system will flag it, and we will contact you directly." Good, I thought. Let the system carry some of the weight for once. On my way out, I noticed a woman from the neighborhood near the teller line. She looked at me the way people do when they've heard whispers. "Are you all right, Margaret?" she asked, voice low. "Perfectly," I said. "I just had some business to attend to." The truth, spoken plainly, unsettles people who expected frailty. When I arrived home, the air inside felt calmer. Papers where they should be, drawers as I'd left them. But calm, I've learned, can also mean preparation. I set the sealed trust binder in the drawer of my writing desk, second slot down, a place no one touches but me. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, "Trust established. Bank notified. Documents secured." Small sentences, but together they formed a shield. Around mid-afternoon, Paul called. "Mom, I was thinking, maybe we should look at assisted living options together. There's no pressure, just planning." Planning, his favorite word lately. "That won't be necessary," I said. "Why not?" "Because I've already made arrangements." Silence, the kind that carries panic just beneath the surface. "What arrangements?" he asked. I let the quiet stretch, not to punish him, but because it was the first time he had truly asked rather than told. "My financial affairs are settled," I said. "You won't need to manage anything." He exhaled sharply. Surprise, frustration, maybe even fear. I heard papers shuffling on his end, as though the version of events he'd been preparing no longer fit the shape of reality. "Mom, you've been confused." "No," I replied calmly. "You've been mistaken." He tried again, softer this time. "We're only trying to help." I didn't argue. Arguments give people room to revise their stories. Instead, I said, "I know exactly what I'm doing," and ended the call. Afterward, I sat by the window watching the light shift across my living room floor. The house seemed to exhale with me. I realized, not for the first time, that clarity doesn't always come in a moment of crisis. Sometimes it comes after a pen scratches across a document that restores what someone else tried to take. By evening, the trust paperwork was tucked safely away. But the weight of the day lingered. The kind of weight that follows a woman who has just done something quietly decisive. I made myself a simple dinner, soup, bread, a few slices of apple, and ate at the table where so much of this had started. No shaking hands, no misplaced items, no confusion. Just me, in my own home with my rights intact. Before bed, I opened my notebook once more. They expected weakness. They didn't expect preparation. I closed it gently. The days that followed felt strangely suspended, as if the world were holding its breath alongside me. Nothing dramatic happened. No surprise visits. No false concern delivered at my doorstep. But quiet can be deceptive. Quiet is when people plan. I spent the morning tending to the small things in the house, wiping down the counter, straightening the stack of mail, brushing crumbs from the kitchen table. I wasn't distracted. I was observing. Every object has a memory, and lately, mine had begun to carry the fingerprints of others. Around noon, I noticed the first sign. A voicemail, short, almost whispered, from someone at Paul's office. "Just checking if the documents came through," the voice said. He mentioned a guardianship petition. Petition. The word landed heavily, not because it frightened me, but because it confirmed what I had known all along. They were moving quickly now, pushing their version of me into place before I could challenge it. I played the message twice, memorizing every inflection. Then I deleted it, not to hide anything, but to prevent it from disappearing into the wrong hands. My notebook held the truth. I didn't need recordings cluttering my phone. In the afternoon, I drove to the grocery store. I prefer to shop alone. It is a small reminder to myself that independence does not vanish simply because others find it inconvenient. As I picked out apples, the cashier, a young girl with kind eyes, leaned forward. "Your son came by yesterday," she said. "He told us to keep an eye on you. Said you've been having episodes." Episodes. A clinical word for moments that never happened. I thanked her gently and paid for my things. Her concern wasn't malicious. It was borrowed from someone else's narrative. That's how reputations slip. Not because they're pushed, but because they're handed quietly from one well-meaning person to the next. When I returned home, another sign waited for me. A pamphlet slid under my door. Silver Glen Assisted Living, compassionate care for your loved ones. Someone had circled a room number on the back. A recommended placement. No signature, no explanation, just pressure, wrapped in glossy paper. I sat in my chair by the window and let the sunlight rest on my hands. These hands had raised a child, held a dying husband, graded thousands of papers, and carried more burdens than Paul would ever understand. They did not tremble now. I added the pamphlet to my notebook with a single note. Anonymous delivery. Placement implied. Still, the moment that defined the day came in the evening. I heard the rustle of mail at the door. When I picked it up, one envelope stood out. Not addressed to me, not forwarded, not official. Just my name in Paul's handwriting. Inside was a letter. "Mom, we're worried. You're resisting help that you need. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to pursue legal options. Don't make this harder than it has to be. We love you. Paul." I read it twice. It was not a letter written to a mother. It was a letter written to an obstacle. I folded it neatly, placed it in the notebook, and wrote, "He believes pressure will weaken me. He still does not understand my generation." Afterward, I sat quietly, listening to the house settle as the sun dipped behind the trees. I could feel the shift in the air, the sense that things were nearing some kind of point. They were preparing something formal, something decisive. But they weren't the only ones preparing. I reached for the envelope Tom had given me, the competency statement, notarized and sealed. I opened it again, reading the firm handwriting at the bottom. A simple document, yet powerful. Proof written by someone with authority, not assumption. I placed it beside the trust papers. Together, they formed a quiet wall. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, their warm glow reflecting off the window. I watched them for a moment, letting their steady light settle into me. They were escalating, but so was I, with more clarity than panic, more focus than fear. I closed the curtains gently. Tomorrow, I thought, would bring the next step. The day they chose for the discussion about my future arrived with a thin gray sky, the kind that presses down without rain. I dressed with deliberate care, not to impress them, but to remind myself that dignity is a kind of armor. A soft blouse, a cardigan I'd mended twice, trousers without a wrinkle, nothing extravagant, just clean lines, steady colors. When I reached Paul and Erin's house, I saw more cars than I expected. Family cars, a neighbor's sedan, even Dr. Shore's compact car parked near the curb. So this wasn't a talk, it was an arrangement. Inside, the living room had been organized like a meeting, chairs in a circle, papers stacked on the coffee table, Erin moving briskly, as if preparing for a presentation, Paul pacing, his jaw tight. A few relatives sat stiffly, unsure why they'd been summoned but unwilling to appear uninformed. I stood in the doorway for a moment. No one offered me a seat. Finally, Aunt Marion rose and fetched one from the kitchen. "Sit here, Margaret," she said softly. I thanked her, not for the chair, but for the recognition. Paul cleared his throat. "Mom, we're all here because we care about you." Care. A word that had been stretched thin these past weeks. He continued, "We've noticed changes, memory issues, confusion, difficulty managing the house. It's time to consider support systems before something catastrophic happens." He used the word catastrophic as though my continued independence were a threat. Erin slid a stack of documents toward the center of the table. These are recommendations from professionals, evaluations, resources, housing options. Dr. Shore shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her presence here surprised me. She didn't look at me. She looked at the papers, at her hands, anywhere except my face. Someone had pulled her into this without telling her the whole story. A cousin spoke next, hesitant. "We're just worried you might hurt yourself accidentally." "I haven't," I said calmly. "But you could," Erin replied. The room leaned in, waiting for me to falter, to fumble, to forget. But I sat straight, hands folded neatly in my lap, letting the silence expand until someone else grew uneasy instead of me. Paul picked up a document. "We think it's time to formalize care. Maybe a guardianship petition. Just to ensure you're safe." Aunt Marion gasped softly, then caught herself. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something rare in this gathering: doubt in their story. I spoke slowly, the way I used to speak when I wanted my students to pay attention, not just to my words, but to the shape of the truth behind them. "What exactly?" I asked. "Have I done that proves I cannot make my own decisions?" Erin opened her mouth, but Paul cut in. "Mom, this isn't about a single moment. It's about decline. It happens before people notice it themselves." I nodded, as if considering this. The room quieted, waiting for what they assumed would be resignation. Instead, I said, "I see." It was all I said. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse the role they've been assigned. I sat back and folded my hands again, letting their documents sit untouched on the table between us. They had come prepared to explain my life to me, but I had come simply to observe the lengths they were willing to go. For a long moment, no one spoke. The room was thick with expectation, the way air grows heavy before a storm not yet willing to break. Paul shifted first, papers in hand, as if rearranging them might rearrange me too. "Mom," he began carefully, "we need to move forward. Everyone agrees." Everyone. A convenient word people use when they want the weight of a crowd behind their choices. Aunt Marion cleared her throat. "I don't agree, Paul. She seems perfectly able to speak for herself." Erin gave her a small, polite smile that held no warmth. "This is hard for families. Denial is common." Dr. Shore finally spoke, her voice more uncertain than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't recommend guardianship. My assessment didn't indicate impairment." Paul turned sharply toward her. "We talked about this. You said there were concerns." She lifted her chin. "Concerns are not evidence." A flicker of irritation crossed his face, quick but unmistakable. I reached calmly into my handbag. The room stilled, curious. I withdrew a small folder, unassuming, thin, but holding the shape of the truth they had tried to reshape. "I brought something," I said. Paul inhaled sharply. Erin's eyes narrowed. I placed the first document on the table, the notarized competency evaluation Tom had given me. The crisp seal caught the light. "This," I said quietly, "is a professional statement confirming my mental fitness. Dated last week." A murmur rippled across the room. Paul didn't touch it. Next, I laid down the forged page, the one bearing my signature, lifted from another document. "This," I continued, "appeared in my files without my knowledge." Erin leaned forward, color rising in her cheeks. "Are you accusing us of—" "I'm showing what I found," I said. "Nothing more." Then I brought out my notebook. Not the full thing, only selected pages, each dated, each containing observations written in a hand that did not waver. I opened it to the page documenting the pill organizer, the rearranged mail, the bank envelope addressed to Paul at my home. "These," I said, tapping the notebook gently, "are facts, not feelings, not impressions. Facts." Aunt Marion looked from the pages to Paul, her lips tightening. Dr. Shore watched him too, a crease forming between her brows as if something she had doubted privately was unfolding in plain view. Paul swallowed. "Mom, you're misunderstanding." "No," I said. "I understand perfectly." He opened his mouth again, but the certainty in my voice stilled him. I took out one final item, the small recording device. I didn't need to play it. Simply placing it on the table was enough. His face drained, and Erin's expression hardened into something defensive, nearly brittle. A cousin whispered to no one in particular, "What exactly were you planning, Paul?" He didn't answer. I sat back in my chair, not triumphant, simply done with pretending I didn't see what had been happening. "This meeting," I said, "was meant to demonstrate my decline. Instead, it has shown my clarity." The room fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not expectant, not heavy with manipulation, but exposed. I gathered the documents into a neat stack. "You brought your version of my future," I said. "I brought mine." Nothing dramatic, no raised voice. Just truth, spoken plainly by a woman who had been underestimated long enough. I stood, slowly, because at 78, one rises with intention, and thanked Aunt Marion for the chair. No one stopped me. No one dared. I didn't look back as I walked toward the door, but I could feel the shift behind me. the sudden scramble of people confronted with a truth they hadn't prepared for. Some truths arrive softly, like fog. Others arrive like a mirror. This one had done both. I reached for my coat on the rack, the same coat I had worn to funerals, birthdays, and the day I buried my husband. A coat remembers things. This one remembered strength. Before I slipped it on, Tom stepped into the doorway of the living room. He must have arrived quietly, exactly as we'd planned. "Am I late?" he asked, voice even, polite. The room stilled. Aaron froze mid-sentence. Paul's shoulders tightened the way they did when he realized he was no longer controlling the story. I nodded once. Right on time. Tom introduced himself to the others, his tone efficient without being sharp. "I'm Mrs. Hardin's legal counsel." That sentence alone rearranged the room. Aaron recovered first. "This is a family meeting. We didn't authorize a lawyer." Tom didn't blink. "My client did." He placed a thin folder on the coffee table beside the stack of documents they had prepared for me. "I've reviewed the materials presented today, those shared openly, and those found privately in Mrs. Hardin's home. Some raise serious legal concerns." Paul's voice cracked slightly. "Concerns? About what?" Tom opened the folder. "Forgery, for one. Coercion, for another. Manipulation of personal documents. Potential financial exploitation of an elder. These are not small matters." A cousin shifted in her seat. Someone muttered, "Dear God," under their breath. Erin tried to rise, but her legs barely carried her. "This is ridiculous. We were helping her. She's confused. Tom cut her off gently. "Mrs. Hardin has passed every cognitive assessment, including one I arranged to be administered independently. She has full legal capacity. Any petition claiming otherwise would be dismissed and investigated." Paul's face drained to ash. "You're twisting this. She's been acting..." "Acting?" I repeated quietly. "Or noticing?" My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Dr. Shore finally stood. She smoothed her hands over her coat. "I need to say something." Her eyes moved from me to Paul. "I filed an addendum this morning confirming Mrs. Hardin's mental clarity. If anyone attempts to misuse my earlier notes, I will report it." Paul stared at her as though she had betrayed him. Perhaps she had, or perhaps she had simply chosen honesty over convenience. Tom added, "And for the record, the trust is already established. Mrs. Hardin's property and finances are fully protected. Any attempt to access them would trigger automatic review." Silence fell. Heavy. Final. Not the expectant silence from before. This was the silence of plans collapsing. I put on my coat slowly, button by button, the way women of my generation learned to armor ourselves without steel. "Margaret," Aunt Marion whispered, "you don't have to stay here." "I know," I said. I stepped toward the door. No one blocked my way. Even Erin stepped aside, her eyes darting, calculating futures that no longer involved my home, my accounts, or my silence. As I reached the threshold, I paused. Not for them, but for myself. "You tried to make me small," I said softly, "but I haven't forgotten who I am." No one answered. Some truths do not invite reply. I walked out into the gray afternoon, the cold air meeting my face like an old companion. Behind me, their voices rose. Confusion, frustration, blame passed back and forth, like a hot pan no one wanted to hold. But those voices were no longer mine to manage. I closed the gate behind me with a quiet, final click. The air outside carried a thin winter bite, the kind that wakes a person more fully than coffee ever could. I walked home slowly, feeling each step settle something inside me that had been unsettled for weeks. My house came into view, modest, aging in places, but unmistakably mine. It stood there, as if relieved to see me return on my own terms. When I unlocked the door, the familiar scent of cedar and old books drifted toward me. I set my coat on the hook, the same hook my husband once used, and paused in the entryway. The house felt different now, not watched, not disturbed, simply waiting. I put the kettle on, the motion so ordinary it felt almost sacred. While the water heated, I walked through the room slowly, touching the back of a chair, straightening the edge of a picture frame, smoothing the blanket draped across the sofa. Each gesture reminded me that I had not lost anything. Not my mind, not my home, not my place in the world. By the time I sat down with my tea, the silence had become companionable again. The kind of silence I had earned. Not long after, there was a knock. Not urgent, not forceful, almost hesitant. I opened the door to find Dr. Shore standing there, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "I was on my way home." "You're not intruding," I replied. "Come in if you'd like." She stepped inside and looked around, taking in the neatness of the house, the order, the calm. "I needed to tell you something," she said quietly. "I didn't feel right being there today. They tried to use my name to support something I didn't believe." "I know," I said. "I saw it on your face." She gave a small, sad smile. Families can lose themselves in fear. They convince themselves they're doing the right thing, even when they aren't. "Fear isn't an excuse," I said gently. "Not when it comes at the expense of someone else's life." She nodded. "I filed a statement this evening clarifying my position. Not because of them, because of you. You deserved honesty." I thanked her, genuinely. Honesty is a rare currency. After she left, the house dimmed as the day sank away. I turned on a lamp and sat at the kitchen table, my notebook open. I didn't need to write much anymore. The story had shifted. The danger had exposed itself and backed away. Still, I wrote a single line. Today, they saw me. Not the version they invented, me. As the evening deepened, I allowed myself to think of Paul and Aaron. Not with bitterness. Age sands down bitterness the way the sea wears down stone. But with a quiet, weary understanding. They hadn't wanted my decline. They had wanted the convenience of a woman who couldn't refuse them. And when I refused, they mistook it for defiance instead of autonomy. People often forget that older women have lived entire kingdoms of life before anyone tries to reduce them to burdens. Before bed, I walked through the house one more time, switching off lights, feeling the calm return to each room. When I reached the front window, I paused. Across the street, a car sat idling. Paul's car. He didn't step out. He didn't call. He simply sat there in the dark, perhaps waiting for guilt to instruct him. For a moment, I considered going out. But then I let the curtain fall gently back into place. Some conversations can wait. Some truths must settle before they can be spoken. I turned off the final lamp and let the house breathe around me. Tonight, it felt like a home again. The next morning arrived pale and calm, as if the sky itself were relieved. I woke before the sun, not from worry, but from the simple habit of a long life. The house was still, but no longer in that uneasy way. It breathed with me, not around me. I brewed my tea and stepped out onto the porch. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but it felt honest. Birds were beginning to stir in the big oak across the street, the one Paul used to climb when he was small. I watched them lift and shift among the branches, unbothered by the world below. It struck me how life continues, even when people try to rearrange it for you. A little after 10, Paul walked up the driveway. His steps were slow, hesitant. He looked older than he had the day before. Not in years, but in certainty. He didn't have papers with him this time. No pamphlets, no rehearsed tone. Just hands shoved into his coat pockets, shoulders sagging under the weight of a plan that had collapsed. I didn't invite him inside. I didn't need to. We stood on the porch, two adults who had forgotten how to speak plainly to each other. "Mom," he said finally. His voice was thin. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." I studied his face. The boy I raised, the man he became, the stranger he had tried to turn me into. "You meant enough of it," I said. He swallowed. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "No," I answered. "You thought I would not push back." He looked down at his shoes, then out toward the street. "I was scared. About the future. About you being alone. Fear can twist love into something unrecognizable. I understood that. But understanding is not the same as excusing." "You don't protect someone by erasing them," I said. "You protect them by standing beside them, not over them." He nodded, slowly, as if each word landed somewhere he hadn't examined before. "I'm sorry," he whispered. For the first time in weeks, something in my chest eased. Not forgiveness. That takes time. But space. Space for something other than defense. "I'm still your mother," I said, "but not your responsibility to manage, not while my mind and my will remain my own." He nodded again, tears gathering but not falling. "I understand." Whether he understood fully or simply had nothing left to say, I couldn't tell. But he stepped back, gave me a small, uncertain smile, and walked away. Not defeated, but quieter. And that was enough for now. When he was gone, I sat on the porch swing and wrapped my hands around my mug. The world felt open again, not untouched, but intact. I looked at the street, the sky, the bare branches, and I felt something settle deep inside me. Not triumph, not victory, just dignity. The simple, steady dignity of having remained myself when others tried to redraw me. At my age, survival isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It's the soft, persistent refusal to disappear. I closed my eyes and breathed in the cold air. Some battles you win in silence, some by standing up, and some by simply remembering who you are. And I remember. Always. If stories like this speak to you, stay with my voice. Follow along, share your thoughts, and let me know you're here.